My very first conference, I couldn't afford it. The price range was out of my budget. I was just starting my business. And so what I did was I asked to be volunteer. They said, no, we're not doing volunteers. I tried everything to get into that conference, couldn't get in, couldn't afford it. So I decided to set up shop in the Starbucks in the hotel of this conference. And what I did is I went up to the baristas. I baked them a bunch of muffins. I gave them the muffins and I said, hey, I'm going to be here all day and I'm just going to keep getting in line and then getting out of line when it's my turn to order. And I'll order, coffees throughout the day. And I'm just going to try to meet everyone with this badge on. And I showed them like a picture of what I thought the badge would look like. And then every time someone from the conference came in with that badge on, I would get in line behind them and I'd ask them about the conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Community Made Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaynor. Now, as you know, this season is all about how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships. In the first few episodes of this season, I shared why relationships are the ultimate asset and how a live event in 2011 fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life, why proximity is power and how who you surround yourself with is who you become, and why great events and live experiences can be the ultimate unfair advantage when you're a high-growth-minded entrepreneur because they deliver one of our most valuable assets, which is speed. The speed of growth, the speed of wisdom, and the speed of relationships. In the last episode, I shared my playbook on how to foster deep and genuine relationships while at events. So today, I thought I would bring on some highly qualified friends of mine to share their thoughts and philosophies as well. My guests are UJ Ramdas, who's making his second appearance on the podcast, and the lovely Vanessa Van Edwards. Vanessa is a gem. She is the author of Captivate, the Science of Succeeding with People, and is considered a leader on creating deep and lasting relationships. According to her professional bio, she is a lead instigator at her human behavior research lab, The Science of People. She designs original research experiments to crack the code on human behavior. Her unique work has been featured on NPR, The Wall Street Journal, The Today Show, and USA Today. She has written for CNN, Fast Company, and Forbes. Vanessa is a monthly columnist for Entrepreneur Magazine and The Huffington Post. As a professional people watcher, Vanessa's groundbreaking workshops and courses teach individuals how to succeed in business and life by understanding the hidden dynamics of people. Vanessa has spoken to groups across the globe, from the stage at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, to presenting her research at MIT. She has used her research to consult for numerous Fortune 500 companies, including American Express, Clean and Clear, and Symantec. She is also, if that's not enough, a national spokesperson for Dove. Now, UJ, his bio is not as long. The world is still his oyster, I guess you could say. He's the co-creator of the wildly successful 5-Minute Journal, but joking aside, UJ is one of my most loyal friends, and one of the biggest things I've learned through him over the years is the importance of going deep when it comes to relationships. UJ is notorious for shying away from phone calls and coffee dates with friends, as he opts instead for half-day deep dive sessions. A few housekeeping things that I'd like to add before we get into the conversation. First, we'll be giving away 10 copies of Vanessa's book, Captivate, in the Community Made group, a book that we referenced several times in this episode. If you're not a member, joining the group is free. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. Second, for fun, I decided to take some of the concepts shared in this season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships and go deeper in a intimate live workshop setting. I love hosting events and workshops, and to my surprise, when I announced this initially on a Facebook post, it sold out in about a day and a half, and I thought it was going to be a little harder to sell out initially. So because of the demand, we decided to announce a second date. So for dates and availability on that, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. That's superconnectorworkshop.com. And third, if you're a fan of what we're doing here at Community Made, I would be forever grateful if you would share this podcast with a friend. I specifically avoided traditional marketing methods of building an audience for the podcast because I don't care for vanity metrics, I guess you could say. I don't want a lot of listeners. I want the right listeners. And I'm a firm believer that amazing people like yourself know other amazing people. So if you know someone who would benefit from an episode from one of our seasons, please send it along to them. Besides that, let's get right to it. This is such a great, intimate conversation with two of my favorite people, so enjoy.
So let's give some context. So UJ facilitated the introduction between the both of us last year because you met at this event. And for those listening, we are at an event called 212 in Denver. This is the only event I'm attending this year outside of my own. And UJ, who's been on the podcast before, to my right, introduced me to Vanessa because you guys were paired up as wingman and wingwoman for the event. And after the event, he raved about you to me, like absolutely raved about you to me. And I'm always looking to connect with fascinating individuals or at least have them on my radar. So when he told me that, I jotted it down. I'm like, I will keep her on my radar. I was already familiar with you because you're Creative Lives because you've done like 4 of them or something like that. So I was already familiar with your name and that kind of stuff. And then your book was coming out. And then it made sense for an introduction at that point in time to kind of chat. So we had a great conversation then. And then, one of the things we're going to dig into today is relationships. And also, I thought it's a unique angle. We're at an event, how to kind of navigate an event because people approach it very differently. I think all 3 of us would approach it very, very differently. So we can talk about that. And I was going through your book, and it's very funny because I was planning initially to do this interview tomorrow. So I was going to do the bulk of my research tomorrow morning, super early. And then Vanessa came to me earlier today. She's like, we can do it today if you want in the afternoon. I'm like, I haven't had time to do research.
But better.
I did open your table of contents and wherever it is. And I mean, literally everything there applies to being at an event and first impressions. And you have, I completely forgot this. Like, one thing I love about your book, it's very tactical and it's very workbook-like. Like there's things that you actually write. And then there's also like these, and I remember the interview you did with Ryan Hawk, who's a friend of mine who's been to Mastermind Talks last year. You have like playbooks of like how to work a room and like speakers
Maps.
here. Yeah, exactly.
I wanted people to like read it with a highlighter, you know?
It's absolutely brilliant. So we will chat about that. But all that to say, I'm a huge fan of yours.
Thank you.
And the one thing I love about you and I adore about you is that you are not just theory, you put things into practice. You did a TEDx talk. I never looped back with you in regards to that because I want to do it in person. You did a TEDx talk in London.
Yes.
And she sent me a postcard. And all we had was up until that point.
I got a postcard too.
Dude, all we had.
Because you guys introduced me.
A handwritten postcard. And the only interaction we had up until that point was a simple phone call. And those postcards, I mean, I get a lot of gifts and all this kind of stuff. Notes and postcards are things I never throw away. I mean, those. If my house burned down and I could pick between my computer and everything, I would pick those thank you notes and I'd run out the house. And my daughter. Then
yeah, she's good. Yeah, she's good too.
I got 2 arms. I got 2 hands.
Well, I was sitting in London and it was like this moment where it was the last item on my career bucket list, and I checked it off. And I was like, "There's no greater feeling of relief and excitement." And I was like, "Who led me here?" And you guys were on that list, so I wanted to send you a postcard right then and there with a little picture of London on it.
Well, you are a special breed, that's Absolutely. For sure. So this interview is more, or this discussion is more geared towards you and leveraging your wisdom and expertise. Because one of the things, and one of the reasons actually why I want to get UJ involved as well, is not just for his good looks, which is great for radio, but the fact that I tend to have a pretty strong skill set when it comes to building relationships and those kind of things, but a lot of it, it's all unconscious for me. It's things I've just done for years. I haven't been able to kind of identify, what makes a good impression and the mechanics behind it. Therefore, I can't really improve, because I can't work on individual things. That is your wheelhouse. I mean,
because what you're doing is what you have is like a fundamentally great skill set, but it's unconscious.
Yeah.
Right? So
something I can't teach others. They ask me like, how do you, work a room? I'm like,
I just do it.
Care about other people and enjoy conversation.
And I have like a map. It's like the Matrix.
I know. I love it.
Yeah. Like I see the map and I see the movement.
And I got to say, we'll say it now. We'll say it several times throughout the podcast. But your book, Captivate, that's the book we're talking about in essence. And again, it is so well done. And I'm working on a new book in the context of relationships. And I'm so grateful. And the only reason why is because there's no other books out there like it. Yeah. But there was a book out there recently called Tribe that came out by Sebastian Junger, and to me was like, it articulated a lot of things I wanted to say better than I would have articulated. So I'm like, thank God I don't have to write that book. And then when your book came out and I started looking through it, and you sent me like a galley copy and then a copy when it came out, I read it and I was like, thank God I don't have to write this book. Like
it's done.
It's done, and it's done better than if I would have done it myself. So congratulations on it. Captivate is the book. That's what we'll be talking about. So if you can just give us an idea of what got you to where you are. I mean, your interest in that social dynamics and that kind of stuff is is of interest to me. So
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say it came naturally, but it did not. When I was younger, I would break out in hives when I was around the cool kids. Really. And they would start on my forearms, they would slowly creep up my arms. And so I would wear like turtlenecks and like sometimes even gloves to school, and going to school in LA, it was definitely not cold enough to wear gloves. And I realized that I had to find a different way to interact, and I could feel the anxiety when it started. I could actually feel it like in my body, and I had to have very concrete strategies to be able to either calm myself down or find something to do. And so that's, I think, how I was able to try to come up with really specific tactics to stop the anxiety and to do something about it.
Got it. So was this a clear area of focus for you? I mean, throughout your childhood, that this was something that you wanted to fix? Did you even have a notion that you could fix it?
No. And also I had people and my parents, teachers who would say things like, just be yourself, be more authentic. And so that I never thought it was fixable. And then I was in college and I was negotiating with a professor about a paper, and he wanted me to work with a group. And I was like, I'm terrified of working with groups. I'll double the amount of pages if I can work by myself. And he was like, no, Vanessa, this is not about the writing skills. It's about the people skills. And so he was the first person to say, here is an anthropology textbook, a sociology textbook, a psychology textbook. He said, study for your next party like you study for your next chemistry test. And I had never thought about that. The way that I prepared for 212, this conference that we're at right now, was like I was preparing for a chemistry test. I don't know how you guys prepared for the conference, but like I think about, okay, what are the ways that I can break down the relationships of the conversations so that I can pass the test?
That's okay. Well, this is going to be interesting. So I don't know if we want to go right there right now. Maybe.
Conference hacking?
No,
Yeah.
let's just go into your prep.
Prep,
right?
Yeah.
Let's walk through the...
Yeah.
Do you do prep, UJ, just so we can touch on?
I do, but it depends on every event. This event, I did maybe half a day of prep. Not crazy.
So for context, we'll give a little bit of context as far as what 212 is about. It's put on by Adam and Jordan Bornstein. It's for the most part, entrepreneurs. There's some people here who are not entrepreneurs, but it's a highly curated group. One thing that's very unique about this, and even more unique than the mastermind talks, is its intimacy. There's only 65 people here on site. So it's an event where even though you're not together for a long period of time, it's only 2 days, you have a very good opportunity to meet almost everybody. Mm-hmm. So that prep is... it's something that not too many people do. Mm-hmm. And it's something I'm even intrigued about that you still do it, given that when I meet you, I just instant connection. I think you're on the ball. You come across as somebody super extrovert and super comfortable in social situations. So would love to know a little bit about that prep, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. So my very first conference, I couldn't afford it. The price range was out of my budget. I was just starting my business. And so what I did was I asked to be volunteer. They said, no, we're not doing volunteers. I tried everything to get into that conference, couldn't get in, couldn't afford it. So I decided to set up shop in the Starbucks in the hotel of this conference. And what I did is I went up to the baristas. I baked them a bunch of muffins. I gave them the muffins and I said, hey, I'm going to be here all day and I'm just going to keep getting in line and then getting out of line when it's my turn to order. And I'll order, coffees throughout the day. And I'm just going to try to meet everyone with this badge on. And I showed them like a picture of what I thought the badge would look like. And then every time someone from the conference came in with that badge on, I would get in line behind them and I'd ask them about the conference. And I would tell them, hey, I couldn't afford to go to the conference. I'm a new entrepreneur. Would you mind telling me what it's like? What's going on? What did you learn from this session? And every single person would tell me their biggest learning from that morning, their biggest action step that they were going to take, and what they were excited about for the next day or two. And I did this for 12 hours, both days at the conference. Every speaker, I bought their coffee when they got up front. And it was maybe, $50 2 days. And I made more contacts from that very first conference than almost any other conference I've ever been to.
How long ago was that?
That was 10 years ago.
No way.
9 or 10 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
And what I realized in that was that your context of how you meet people at a conference is really important. So it's not just showing up. It's actually, there's microcosms of connections within a conference. Like, for example, you can meet people very easily if you hover around the food, right? So there's the appetizers, the breakfast tables, the lunch tables. But there's also where do people get their coffee? There's also the bathrooms. There's also the bathroom lines. There's also, my favorite parts of conferences are the 5 minutes where you're waiting for a session to start. I never check my email during that time. That's a time where you can really optimize. So I think about, okay, with this conference of 65 people, what's my best microcosm to meet people? And for this particular conference, I do think there's all these different sessions. It's the 5 minutes right before you start. And so I am very, very conscious of all those in-between times. When people normally go to the bathroom, I am never going to the bathroom during those times. When people are normally out getting coffee or checking their email, I'm never doing that because those are the best times to meet people right before they're about to learn something. So that's the first thing.
I will just confirm that I think between every session I saw you for some reason.
Yes.
Yes. And I didn't have that that touch point ratio with anybody else. I'm like, Vanessa's always around.
That's why.
That's smart. No, that's good.
That's why. That's the best time. And also, people have their guard down. So what happens at a conference is there's this high level of pressure to prove yourself and figure out who you need to know. Right? That's what most people come to a conference thinking, what do I need and who do I want to meet? That's okay, but it's a lot of pressure. So at the beginning of a session, when they say, everyone go around and introduce yourself, that's like your moment to shine. And it's very high pressure. It's so hard to meet people that way. Whereas when you're standing around outside the room, you're refilling your coffee, it's so much easier to be like, hey, how's the coffee today? Right? Or what was your last session? Who was your last mentor? So that's the second thing as I prepare is I always prepare my conversation starter for the weekend.
What are some examples of that?
Yeah. So for conferences, one that works really well is, so what's your goal for this weekend? Can I help with anything on it? I asked you that yesterday, and we had the most fascinating conversation about your goal for the weekend. Right?
Yeah. And we talked about your goal for the weekend as well. And that was what locked it in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what's your goal for the weekend? What did you learn from your last session or from the last session? Are you going to do anything different after this conference from what you learned today? Like those are all really interesting, unique conversation starters. And it's so much better than, so what brings you here?
Yeah.
What do you do? From Denver? Are you from Denver? Right? Like, God, those are the worst.
Yeah, you can't go anywhere with it. What you want is open-ended questions.
Right.
You want questions where you don't want a yes/no binary question, right? Mm-hmm. Do you learn anything? Yes, no. What? Mm-hmm. No. What did you learn? Which is a great question, right?
Yeah. I also believe that in the first few seconds of a conversation, your brain makes a decision. It decides, am I going to go to sleep or am I going to wake up?
For sure.
Right? And so in those first few seconds, if you ask, what do you do? What brings you to Denver? What brings you here? The brain goes, sleep mode.
Yeah.
But if you ask something different, I think the brain chooses to wake up. Yeah. And that's when you have these really fascinating conversations. And I'm very allergic to small talk. That is one of the reasons I think I get hives, is I don't do well in that kind of conversation. So those are the two really easy ones that I start with for conferences.
What do you look for in conferences? Do you still attend a lot of conferences?
Very few.
Okay.
Very few. I usually only go to conferences I speak at.
Got it.
This was a rare exception last year, and I was really glad I took it. Mm-hmm. So very, very rarely do I go. Typically, I try to go to conferences where I at least know 3 people. And the reason for that is because if you know 3 people, they can often introduce you to their 3 people, which then introduce you to their 3 people, which helps you a lot with not knowing anyone or knowing everyone. And if you know everyone, you also don't meet anyone. So I think that if you know 3 people, and if you don't know 3 people, like last year, I looked at the attendee list, and the third thing that I think about is what can I offer? So the very first conference or second conference that I actually paid for, I was wanting to meet people. I was wanting to get things. And I realized that was a terrible way to walk around. Whereas if I thought to myself, what can I offer? What's the offer that I have? And at the time, I was covering trends, especially in the youth space. That's where I sort of started my career. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I was looking for trendsetters. And an offer that I had was to cover whatever product they had as part of a trend. And so all I was doing was going around and being like, hey, is there anything that you're working on that would be trendworthy that I could cover for you? I made more connections that way than asking for things that I could do. So I always try to come to a conference thinking, what is the thing that I can offer other people? And having that really front of mind, almost as my second conversation starter.
Got it. Awesome. So going into this conference, one thing that they did was they released the attendee Rolodex in advance. Is that something that you look at and study in advance or no?
I do. So this is a very specific tactile way of doing it. But I looked at the roster for this year and last year, and I immediately followed everyone on Twitter just to get an idea of their brand if they were on Twitter. Then typically, if I liked what they were posting on Twitter, I went and I retweeted something they posted. And then if I really liked that if they interacted with me, I would often direct message them or reply, hey, I'll see you at 212 in a few weeks. So Jason Pfeiffer, the editor of Entrepreneur Magazine, I saw him on the list. I loved Entrepreneur Magazine already, but I followed him specifically. I retweeted some of his articles, and I wrote to him specifically about a week before, hey, I will see you at 212 in next week. I would love to ask you about the cover of my book. A very specific question. And I have some new research I wanted to give you. When he saw me at the very first breakfast, he was like, wait, we know each other. And so it was almost like having a warm contact that led to amazing conversation. I got to meet his wife, and now I'm a columnist for them.
I saw your piece. Well, I've seen several of your pieces.
Yeah, that never would have happened had I not done that pre-outreach. And it has to be like you actually have to like the articles that you're retweeting and not reach out in sort of an ask, I think, early on.
UJ, do you pre-research?
I do. So not for every conference, but I took about half a day. I'm curious, how long did your prep take?
It was over the course of 4 weeks, probably maybe 3 hours a week.
Wow.
Okay. So I took half a day because I realized, this is important to me. And so I just got together with Matt Bodner, who both of you know, and Floyd. And we skipped the fight, and we did research.
How dare you? Greatest fight of all time.
I just figured I could watch it the next day. And that was just like a 4 hour chunk of, like 4 to 5 hour chunk of time that was just great. And we could just cover different people and just trust these guys so much that we could get everybody's kind of opinions on it and we know what each of us wants from the conference. So it was a really cool way of getting multiple heads together to prep and to help each other out. So that's kind of the way that I've always done it. And also my conversations typically tend to meet somebody and we tend to dive into something that's really important. And that might take 10 minutes, it might take 20 minutes, it may take hours. So I always tend to look for people that I can have like a fairly long-term fit with. And we talked about this yesterday, Vanessa. Like, I don't really see much of a difference between personal and professional. A lot of what I do personally just like translates into the business. So I just look for people who are doing cool stuff that there is a spark of like interest and curiosity in.
I also have a general rule that I think people will probably disagree with me on, which is great, is I almost never approach the VIPs or the speakers. Almost never. I just think that they're already overbooked, overtapped, overasked. It's not the best place for me to contact them. And so I almost never will approach them. If they're sitting next to me, I will say hi. But otherwise, I think it's the worst timing possible to approach them at a conference where they're speaking.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's you see it all the time. You actually saw it here as well. Is that some people don't pay attention to who those speakers are in advance. Like we had one of the speakers came up and sat right next to me. We had a great conversation at breakfast. Nobody paid him any attention. Then he got up on stage, and then once he does his talk, everybody rushes to get a piece of him. And I'm like, he was around earlier.
There's also this funny thing that happens with speakers is they're kind of on edge, I think, all weekend a lot of the time because they're being approached and asked. So one of the best things you can do at a conference, I did it last year at 212, and I didn't really know many people, is if I kind of know you, I will always invite you to come sit at my table. Like I will call to you across the room. Like I chased UJ in the bar yesterday when I saw him because there's something very magical when someone wants to sit with you. Right? Like, do you remember, like, back in elementary school when you walked into the cafeteria and someone was like, hey, Jason, like, come over, and they beckoned you over? There is no greater feeling in the world. So if I kind of know you, I will yell to you across the room and be like, please come sit with us. I think that that's one of the best offers I can give when I don't have anything else to offer. Like this year, I don't have so much to offer. Like I can try to be friendly. So all I'm trying to do this conference is make sure that someone always has someone to sit with. That is my goal this year. And so when I'm at the bar, I'm like, please come sit with us. When I go to lunch, I'm like, yeah, come to lunch with us. On the app, if someone doesn't have something to do, I'm the first one to be like, hey, like I was going to walk around Denver, come walk with me. So if that's all you have to offer, that is one of the greatest feelings when someone invites you to sit with them.
So what is the benefit of coming to an event like this? I mean, what do you guys, do you guys focus on the content and the ROI that you'll get from listening to certain speakers? Is it the relationships? Is it a mix of both?
Well, when I look at, excuse me, when I look at an event like this, the reason I'm back this year. I was here last year. We were both here last year, Vanessa and I. Is the quality of attendees is fairly high, and and both of you know this about me. I'm not a very much like run by the schedule, run by the book kind of guy. I just tend to find people that are fascinating, that we can have great kind of conversations with, and we can share ideas and opportunities, and we could just like take it where it needs to go. For example, like this right now, we're recording a podcast when there's like an activity going on. There's a tour.
We're the bad ones.
Right? There's a tour that's happening at a beer factory, and there's a tour that's happening at a cannabis factory. Yeah. Right? And here we are having a fun time, recording this podcast.
This is better.
Right? Exactly. Right? So I come for these moments. Right? I come for these moments of like the kind of magical serendipity or whatever. I don't know.
Serendipity?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Serendipity.
But that's what I come for. I come for these moments of really cool connection with people that are doing great things, and we just naturally end up supporting each other. That's what happened with Vanessa and I last time. It happened with a bunch of other people at 212 as well.
Was there a specific moment where you used to look at events from a ROI perspective as far as what am I going to learn versus who am I going to meet?
Dude, that was all you, actually. I have to credit my entire change of mindset to you and nobody else. Because when Jason and I first met, Jason was dropping unbelievable amounts of money at the time for me on events. I think your budget for the year was $150,000 for like all kinds of learning events and things like that. And that was more than I was making at the time. And it was nuts because I didn't see the value in it. And I probably told you I didn't see the value in it. And over time,
you're one of those people. I had a lot of those people.
You hear from them a lot.
Well, the thing is, like, over time, I actually saw the difference. I saw how it made a ton of sense. And I saw how you didn't have to calculate the ROI necessarily. It just, like, the value of, the cool thing was having a business that is truly in line with who you are is you don't have to do anything differently than what you normally would do. You just, it's a pure representation of your core yourself. And so when that's happening, when you start to naturally like somebody and have conversations, you naturally start to share value with them. You naturally start to help them see what they need. They try to find out what you need, and you help each other. It's just a natural process. And when you come to events like Mastermind Talks and 212, that there's a natural kind of understanding that we're all here to help each other, and we're all here to share ideas. And the curation's already done. So all we have to do is show up and be ourselves and do the prep work that we need. In my opinion, prep work is about 60 to 70% of results. If you can do all of the thinking and planning beforehand, you just show up, and now I just know what you're running. So Vanessa and I are pretty analytical, right? So we look at a situation, and like, I'm very curious, actually, maybe later at dinner, we'll like read the room. And I'm curious to like see how you read the room.
I like finding alphas in the room.
Yeah. Like
am I an alpha?
Where the
You're manning the mic, my friend. You're an alpha.
We all got the same mic right now, and it goes three ways. I'm in port number 2 of this recording machine, so I'm second in command. You're actually number 1 right now. You should know.
Right? There's always like circles of concentration. There's always like kind of blank areas around the bar. Is usually like between the bar and the seating arrangements usually pretty like packed.
I have a kind of weird reason that I come to these events. I love the relationships. I love learning from keynotes. But actually why I come is as a litmus test for my own business and success. So,
I do the same.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
I think we all do it without realizing it.
For sure.
So for example, everyone's asking you, what do you do? Right? What are you selling? And in that moment of answering, if I am not proud of what I'm working on, I know I have a lot of work to do. So I find that at these conferences, this is a high-level group of people, right? And now I'm only going to conferences with either invite only or high-level people. If I don't have a really clear answer for what I do, something needs to change. If I'm not really proud of what my answer is, something needs to change. If someone, and this happened in the last mentor session, Mark Manson goes, okay, Vanessa, like, tell me about your book, what you do. So I told him, and he like pulls up my website, and it was this moment of like, am I proud of him? Am I proud for him to look at my website, or am I not? Like, if I give out my business card, am I really proud of them to go look at my product suite, or am I not? So it's actually like this litmus test of how am I doing? Not only how do I feel, but also like compared to the people around the room, how am I keeping up? So that's why I use it. It's a soul searching exercise for me, and I usually either leave being like I'm on the right track, or unfortunately this year I don't think I'm on the right track, and so I'm going to have to make some really hard changes on Wednesday.
And you use it on some level the same way?
Same. So
it's interesting. I've never heard that angle before. It's either like content or community. Like those are the two.
It's interesting because
two values that I've sold, at least in the past.
Mastermind Talk is actually a great example of this because I've attended pretty much every single one except the one where I was dying in Indonesia. And
you're excused.
And the thing with that is from the beginning to now, I've been very fortunate to grow significantly. And it's interesting to see the people I compare myself with now in Mastermind Talks versus the people I used to compare myself with. It's interesting to notice, the feelings I have now of like curiosity and questions versus maybe the nervousness that I had initially walking into a room with a bunch of people that were doing incredible things, and I was a little insecure about what I was doing and how I was doing it. So absolutely, that's a pretty strong indicator of how am I doing.
How am I doing?
It's a nice kind of way to figure out where my bar is and where it needs to be. And
yeah.
No,
it's actually it's interesting. Like it almost reminds me of like martial arts and like boxing or jiu-jitsu or whatever, any of those martial arts where if you spar, you know where you stand
exactly
in that totem pole.
You only know where you stand when you come. And you fight.
Yeah. You got to spar though. You have to show up in the
Yeah.
Right. It's
and in sparring in the context of going to an event is being open and vulnerable.
Exactly.
And it's
and offering and asking, like, for example, we see, I call the swan effect. Like you go to someone's website and it looks great, right? Perfect, great polish, looks like they have big numbers, but you really don't know. You don't know until you're here and you're in the room with all these VIPs and you hear the questions they're asking. That's when you go, we just saw that was underneath the water. And what I don't like the swan. I like the murk. I like the chaos.
We're both into that shit.
I like the paddling underneath the water. And so that's where I think it gets really interesting. And I also like to be vulnerable about really what's not working in my business and what's working. That's, I think, where the really exciting conversations come. And you can't do that online because you have to look like you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we've had a few mentor sessions so far. And what's interesting is I really enjoy them because to me, like that's kind of like a battlefield, right? It's kind of like you're showing up and now you're asking questions and you're being very like you're there everybody's there to learn, including the presenter or the mentor at the front. And what's interesting, I look for the quality of questions. What's the quality of questions that people are asking? What is their thinking like? Who's the quiet, calculating type?
Yeah.
Who is the outspoken kind of like the question asking type?
Well, tell me if you agree with this or not. So I have this theory that all entrepreneurs are, if you look at sports, either there are people who aren't playing yet. They really want to play. Some people call them wantrepreneurs, which is a terrible name, but they're not playing yet. They really want to play. They're peeking in. They're not sure what their business is yet. They don't have maybe an email list or whatever. They're not playing yet. Then you have the people who are playing JV, right? Like they're on the JV team. They're like just starting to play. They're just starting to build up their brand and they are hustling big time and they're desperate to look for varsity and pro players. Then you have the varsity players. The varsity players, they've got it figured out, right? They're rolling. They're making good money. There's a small chance they might go pro, but like really that's the best that they have. And so I think that when you go to conferences, you're in around a room, you're trying to figure out, where am I? Am I still playing JV? Am I varsity? Have I gone pro? You know when you're pro. I think you know. And then where are people around you and how can you learn from them or help them? And so I'm always trying to place people on that scale because none of them are bad. They're just very, very different needs in each one.
Yeah, and parts of their journey.
Yeah. And one question I actually like to ask people, even the organizer, is like, who here is someone you'd recommend me to meet? Who here would you think would make sense for us to meet? So
I usually ask like when people it's when we talk about like, oh, how was that last session or those kind of things, I usually try to ask people like, is there somebody you met that's been like fascinating thus far? Or like, I'm always looking for people who are like diamonds in the rough. Not necessarily the big names, the big VIPs, but who is like somebody who's super promising and just fascinating and up to really cool things.
The varsity player that hasn't gone pro yet.
Yeah.
But like no one's like been there to like see his games.
Well, that's where, I mean, UJ knows this. That's where I allocate the majority of my energy because, the most of the people want to be connected to like the Richard Bransons of the world,
but Jason's actually like fundamentally great at that. Like you're really good at identifying early stage talent before they make it big, and just run with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mastermind Talks has been like an incubator of that on some level. I mean, look, you're a great example. I mean, when I met UJ was a hypnotherapist and came to Mastermind Talks, and they just launched a 5-minute journal, and then just caught on like wildfire after that, and just have watched you evolve into this beautiful entrepreneur man you are.
Jason, is there anyone who you've spotted early and has surprised you when they were actually like live at the event?
At Mastermind Talks?
Yeah.
I gave a bunch. And for different reasons, like to see how they work the room. Not necessarily working the room, but if they're very hungry, asking questions, those kind of things. If there's so many. I mean, there's one guy comes to mind just off the last event because I'm such a fan of his, and I told you about his company. A guy named Jesse Katz out of Vancouver has a great brand called Roots of Fight, I'm just a huge fan. Like that's the one thing. The people that come to Mastermind Talks, like I'm just huge fans of them. Like I'm their biggest fan. Like that's my whole like kind of philosophy on some level is how some people would approach investing in a business. I approach investing in people that way, and my investment is not financial. I mean, it could be, but it's by being their biggest fan, their biggest supporter, and believing in them, and sometimes when they may not believe in themselves. And then when you invest in them at that level, amazing people become increasingly amazing over time. Yes. So the best time to build a relationship with Tim Ferriss is not now. It's 10 years ago when he created, 4-hour work week or something like that. So that's what gets me excited about in the context of relationships and always spotting like these early talents of people I can support.
I think that let's pretend for a second that you ran your own Mastermind Talks, right? If your goal going into every interaction was to try to find the diamond in the rough, that would be a magic sauce for all your interactions. Because when you're asking questions to try to figure out if someone's a diamond, it's totally different than just trying to figure out what someone is, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's a very different mindset of searching. And so I think that like my equivalent would be inviting people over to sit with me, right? Mm-hmm. Your equivalent is like, what's the shiny stuff underneath the dirt, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if you could keep that center of mind, like if I often ask people, like if you could give a TED Talk on something that you're not a specialist in, which is one of Tim Ferriss's favorite questions, what would it be? It's the same thing when you're interacting with someone. If you had to sell someone else's business, what would you ask them to be able to know how to sell them best? That's a very different way of asking questions because you're trying to figure out where's the diamond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's it's getting me all excited.
Yes.
So I have a question for you, for both of you. I'm going to ask you in a second, what are some other things you may do to really leverage the value or amplify the value of an event or a live experience. But the one thing we did talk about is that you guys got we all got the Rolodex of everybody in advance. This is something we don't do at Mastermind Talks. And especially, I guess, UJ, you've been to all 5 of our events. You've been to now 212. Do you have a preference? I mean, it seems like you
always like to get it early. I always like to get it early. I probably handed you a couple times to get it early.
You have. And I'll give you, and I'd love to know your feedback on this. Yeah. So the reason I haven't given it historically is because inherently, obviously, people will research people in advance. And what they will do is they will look them up on social media and prejudge based on what they find on social media. So I know people with $100 million businesses with 3 contacts on LinkedIn, and they're like, this guy's not worth my time.
Right.
Then they enter the live experience, and then you run into that situation where you're in conversation with somebody, and they may be looking over your shoulder because they're like, that's actually the person I really want to talk to. So we try to avoid that and keep it blank. So by the time you come to Mastermind Talks and that that experience, you are curious to know as to why everybody's there. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'd love to know your feedback on like either approach, because now knowing that
I have strong thoughts on it, but I'll let Vanessa
now
go
knowing
first.
that both you do it so much as prep work and that use that to kind of navigate. I'm curious. I'm always open to kind of restructuring our model.
My personal, I do separate sometimes my personal and professional opinion. My personal opinion is, of course, I love it. My professional opinion is do not give it out. And the reason for that is purely from a chemical psychological perspective. So I like to think about events as how can you create a peak psychological experience, right? So from the very first moment they open your email, like before they even get to the event, to all the way through booking their airplane tickets, showing up on that day, to the very last thing. So if you send someone the list ahead of time, there is a little bit of dopamine, like a little bit of excitement, and then it quickly turns into cortisol and adrenaline. When I looked at this list, I immediately was like, okay, who are all these people? I don't know any of these people. Oh my goodness, I'm going to be alone. Oh, I do know that person. Oh, I really want to know that person. Like it immediately turns into a hunting game, right? Hunting game, or you go on someone's social media and you're like, oh, they don't have a lot of followers. And followers doesn't tell you anything about an actual person, as I said, the swan effect. So that's the first thing is you actually very quickly turn a positive experience into cortisol and adrenaline. Cortisol, the stress hormone, adrenaline, the alarm hormone, to make it simple. If you don't give the list, there's a lot more dopamine when someone actually meets someone in person because they haven't discovered anything about the person. So there are 3 chemicals that you want to trigger in an interaction: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Right? This is my favorite cocktail. I call it my interaction cocktail. When I'm interacting with someone, I'm trying to give us both a nice drink.
Those are also the chemicals behind flow.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay,
the
perfect.
Psychology of optimal experience.
So this is like flow with people.
Yeah.
So very quickly, dopamine, pleasure, rewards, makes us feel good and excited. Serotonin, calm, mood stabilizer, feeling like we are okay. Oxytocin, the connection hormone, making us feel like we belong, we're accepted. So if you don't know who's coming and you meet someone, you're excited to figure out what is it that they do. They're less likely to be looking over your shoulder to see who else can they meet, which means you're going to get more eye contact and more oxytocin. And then you're also going to feel this sense of calm when you actually do meet someone and they surpass your expectations. Because almost everyone in person usually does have something amazing to offer. But if you've prejudged them online, you don't look for it. You're no longer looking for the diamond. And so I would say, don't give it. Because chemically speaking, you're priming someone to be getting a much more exciting cocktail on the actual day.
Beautifully said. Case closed, UJ. I'm sorry. Sorry, it's not happening.
I'm sorry.
Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, do you have a different viewpoint?
I think my brain is wired a little differently.
Yeah.
No way. No way.
I think my brain's wired a little differently. When I look at it, I just start to look at connections, and I start to the Rolodex actually fires up my imagination. And I actually don't look at as much as how many followers do they have, as much as like what is their quality of thinking. Because that's or like what do they love? Because
Can you tell that from Twitter? I would rather know that from you in person. I would rather not know anything.
You could. It depends on the person. Depends on what their method of expression is, their website is, etc. But you can tell someone when someone's like a really, really great at e-commerce. You can tell from in a second from looking at their website. These guys understand design. These guys understand copy. These guys understand conversion, right? So, and like someone asked me like recently, both of you have heard of expected value, the idea of that decisions are best made based on the information you have. You make a decision based on what the best expected value would be. And he asked, like, would you walk into a situation like not calculating the value? I'm like, yeah, I have to tell myself I'm not calculating value, and I walk in and I'm fine. And so when I walk into an event like this, I just let go because I've already done the work, so I don't have to do anything anymore. And actually, I feel a lot more calm walking in if I've done the prep work.
He's your ideal, though. Right, and not everyone.
No.
Yeah.
UJ is 1 in 100. Like UJ is a different breed.
You're a different breed.
Yeah. But I mean, I subscribe somewhat to the similar kind of notion. Like I said, I want to avoid people creating this totem pole of people or a hot list of like who they need to meet up with and those kind of things. And I think one thing that adds to that is the fact that it's curated. People like if it's a non-curated event, it's even more important to do your research in advance because then it's a sea of people and you're trying to
you curate.
Yes, exactly. So in a situation where there's curation,
for what it's worth, like my overall recommendation would be don't send the Rolodex, but I would say send me the Rolodex.
Special exception.
So what any other, I guess I don't say tactics or strategies because it sounds very transactional and icky, but are there anything else that you do during the live experience itself to kind of maximize even whether it be note-taking, the relationship side of things?
So I like to walk into breakfast, lunch, and dinner like around halfway.
Yeah, you never want to be first. Yeah. I learned that back in the day when I used to go to clubs because I never went to clubs. So my girlfriend have a birthday at a club or something like that, and they open at 9. I'm there at like 8:59, and I'm there standing for 2 hours. So there's nobody there. So don't be first. That's a good one.
Yeah, I like that. I also like to capitalize on the transition times. You mentioned that early. Right, the transition times is the most beautiful time to meet people, connect. Like it's so fluid. Nobody's
and
really
never check
it.
your email in line.
Yeah, hell no.
Lines are. I used to wait in line when I didn't have to wait in line. If I don't know someone at a conference, I will go wait in line for something just so I can talk to the person in front of behind me.
Yeah, that's a great thing as well.
I just do no phones. Period. During the event.
Yes.
Like it's just that no phones. Period. Because if it's a speaker, I want to give them 100% presence. They remember that from the stage.
They do.
Like they see you if somebody's on the phone and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I try to be as present as possible.
So
during that
actually, this is a nonverbal tip. I haven't been in mentor sessions with you guys, I don't think yet. But so non-verbally, we love attention. We can't help it. And there's a couple ways that we show liking with nonverbal. So the first way is nodding. Specifically, the triple nod makes us feel real warm and gushy inside, right? So for example, if I'm like 1, 2, 3, wonderful. But if I'm like, that doesn't feel as good. So the triple nod when a speaker says something that really resonates with you, is just a nonverbal way of highlighting what they just said. Eye contact obviously makes sense. Leaning in. So if someone says something that I'm really interested in, like if someone asked a question or if the speaker says something like off the cuff, like, I wasn't going to talk about this, but I will always show them that I'm so excited for that by leaning in, and then also angling your toes, your torso, and your head towards the person speaking. So I have been able to build a lot of relationships with speakers or mentors just by being not the most excited person in the room, but being the most attentive person in the room. And they give me longer answers when I ask questions. They give me more eye contact. They speak directly to me. And I found they will say my name more often. So I've actually qualitatively experimented with this where when I give a lot of nonverbal, they will most likely be like, like what I just said to Vanessa, they'll bring up my name more often than when I'm sort of angled away or have my computer up in front of me or not looking as much. So that can be a really easy way to just give kudos to the person that's speaking.
Those are great tips. Something I also like to do is be the first person to ask the question.
Yeah, 100%. There's always that dead space.
Yeah.
I had 15 questions prepped for this morning for Chris because I'm like, usually there's that dead space and you want to, and as a speaker, you are dying on stage. You're like, somebody asked me a question, and if it's a well thought out, well researched question, you remember that bar. You remember that person.
I thank people when I'm a speaker at conferences. I will go up to someone who asked a really good, either the first or really good Q&A. I'll say, "Thank you so much for that question. It is such a gift. It is such a gift."
Yeah, absolutely.
I also, this is a silly one, but I'm a really loud laugher on purpose. And the reason for this is because
faker.
No, it's real, but like I let myself go there. So there's this idea called capitalization in human behavior, which is there's nothing worse than a still face or someone who is a wet blanket on your excitement. So there's this fascinating experiment. It's on YouTube. If you search the still face experiment, it's fascinating. So what happens they bring a baby and a mother into the lab. And the mother is talking to the baby. She's looking at the baby. They're making eye contact. The mom is saying, "Oh, good, what good little girl." They're making a lot of back and forth facial gestures. And then the experimenters switch a little light and tell the mom to turn around. She turns around for a moment, and then she looks back at the baby with a completely still face. Neutral, but still. The moment a baby sees a still face in the face of her or his excitement, the baby you can see goes into a little bit of a panic. And eventually the baby starts squealing, like screeching very loudly. Then she starts reaching out at the mother with her hands, trying to put her hands in front of the mom's face. And then she loses her posture, like begins to slouch and sink down into her high chair. And then eventually she just starts hysterically crying. The moment the mom lights her face back up again, the baby is fine. I show this video whenever I experience a still facer or a quiet laugher. And like the quiet laughers are like, they're the ones who are like, oh yeah, that's hilarious. Right?
That is not UJ. UJ laughs so loud.
Yeah. And that is
so awkward.
And so so that is why.
But the cool thing is it displaces tension. It just like when someone's laughing,
you can't help but laugh.
You can't help but laugh.
Yeah. You can't help but laugh, but also there's this experience of you just experience something either funny or silly or happy. And if someone not just laughs, but also shows you that emotion back, you actually capitalize the emotion. So it goes from being happiness with a lowercase h to happiness with a uppercase h.
Yeah.
And that is another gift you can give someone. I was talking about offers earlier. An offer is that a speaker just made a joke, and it was a joke, and he tried. And it's a little funny. And if you can laughing out loud to show it, or at least smiling.
Yeah.
Or when someone around the table says, oh, I just launched this new product, and they smile and you're like, oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's like a lack of an offer.
No, what's funny, it makes me think of a friend of mine named Pellegrino, who, I don't know if you met Pellegrino this year.
Yeah.
Man, the guy's a magnet. I mean, we were in, he hosts this little F1 thing in Montreal every year. We bring a bunch of people together, and I went 2 years ago. It was the first time I met him. And I mean, this guy will go up to random people and build rapport like that in seconds. And we'll be in a club, and he will get like all these girls riled up and all that, like, and get them come and talk to the guys and that kind of stuff. I'm like, how do you build rapport with people so quickly? And his philosophy was that when he approached somebody, he goes into that conversation, it was the first time he meets them, as if it was like his best friend. So with like the tonality of his voice is like, how would I greet my best friend, right? So he's like, hey, and like throwing his arms up. And I've, adopted quite that a little bit in my own kind of approach. And it's been, because like you said, I mean, people tend to like match your tonality and your energy, and you're giving them a gift.
Yes.
And to me, even if I'm not, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs identify themselves as introverts. And there's a saying that
I think all of us do here.
I'm an ambivert.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah.
You're a winner. You win the group. So, but for me, like, there's saying that you can act your way into a new way of thinking, but you can't think your way into a new way of acting. So for me, like when I step into like a conference room and there's a bunch of people there, it's going to be uncomfortable for me to be like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
But once you're there, then you start, I don't know, dopamine starts to kick in. You start feeling good. They start, reciprocating with, positive and happy, energetic conversation. And then you're on fire.
Like, I was very, very excited to meet you in person. Like, that was not anything fake. Like, we had already had a bond. And like, I skipped towards you. Both
you
times.
did.
Right?
And you invited me to skip as well. And I told you my five-year-old daughter would not approve of my skipping.
And that's okay. And I was like, that's okay. I'll skip for us both. Right? Because like that, I'm also very playful, but like that was a physical manifestation of exactly that, of like greeting like an old friend or acting like you. But I don't think of it as best friend. So that's a big jump for me. Like the way I greet my best friend is very intimate. So when I meet someone, I think this is a really good old friend from college. Because then it's like you haven't seen each other in a while, so you're still figuring it out, but there's a lot of warmth there. There's a lot of like excitement to see them. So that's the mentality that I use when I greet people.
That's beautiful.
Old friend from college.
Any other things that you do during the event itself? This has been gold, I got to say. Like for most people, they struggle kind of working an event and even looking at an event from a relationship perspective?
A couple really just practical things that I do. If you have a name tag that is like has like a sleeve, mostly they're like that. I will always put my used business, like my new business cards on one side of it and then business cards I collect on the other. It's a really easy way to keep them like handy. Or if you're going to have pockets, one pocket should be yours and one pocket should be someone else's, just because there's a really awkward moment, and this has happened to me multiple times, where someone hands you someone else's business card at a conference because they've been getting a bunch of business cards,
sure.
and then they literally are like searching through every pocket to find it. So it's a really easy logistics one is have a separate place for each one. At the end of every night, I will typically go through my business cards and write on the back what we talked about, very, very briefly, if there was any follow-up needed. And if I want to connect with them on LinkedIn or not. I have a really simple code. So if I put an L on it, it means I want to go and hook up with them on LinkedIn. If I put a star on it, it means I actually want to email them or I promise to email them. And then if there was like a topic or something unique, like for example, I was sitting at the bar and Tim Ferriss was sitting next to me and we'd met before and we talked about moss. Like moss on trees.
Yeah.
And it was like a great topic. And that's like something that...
That's
like,
very Tim Ferriss.
Moss is my favorite flower. So like we bonded over how great the moss is in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Right? So like that would be something that I would write down.
Yeah.
Now, if you're really getting fancy, should we talk about fancy?
Please.
Okay. So if you're a high conscientious person like me, I have a matrix for each person that I meet. Both of you have a matrix in my book. A matrix is basically the personality diode of the person I'm meeting. So it's in chapter 7. It's the 5 personality traits. So how open someone is.
So the ocean, basically?
Ocean, yep, exactly. So I draw a quick circle, either in the back of their business card or in my book, and draw ocean and then put a high or low arrow or a question mark if I'm not sure. And then the next time I meet them, my goal is to fill in their diode.
Do you want to give people a context of what ocean is?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, openness is how imaginative or creative someone is, how adventurous someone is. So if I talk to someone about going on a really cool hike in Denver or trying a new restaurant, they would be high in openness. So that night, I would put an O with a high arrow. That means that if I ever visit them in New York, and a very specific example of this is I met someone last year at 212. He was high in openness. We had talked about like how much he traveled the world. Big VIP. I was visiting New York and I knew he was high in openness. So I emailed him from my diode and I was like, hey, we met at 212 a couple months ago. I'm going to be in New York City. There's this new restaurant that just came out. It's a Japanese cheese shop and I really want to try it. It's totally bizarre. It could be a total bomb, but I want to know if you want to try it with me. Guaranteed he would have said no if I had not offered that very specific high open thing. Versus a low open person, I would email them and say, hey, you probably have a favorite coffee shop in New York with a favorite coffee. I would love to be introduced to your favorite. I'll come whenever you normally go on your normal schedule. I'll be there the whole week of October 10th. Are you free? That's a low open pitch, right? So like I'm fitting to their personality type as opposed to my personality type.
Dude, that is some ninja stuff.
I know. Oh, we got fancy.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we got fancy.
That is...
Because I believe in operating. I don't like that whole phrase of what is it? Treat other people the way you'd want to be treated.
No, you want to treat them the way they want to be treated.
Exactly. And so if I can solve their personality matrix, I never would have remembered that unless I had took note of it.
Yeah. So ocean is actually the most kind of longest standing psychologically tested personality kind of sorting
so we
system.
have a free test in the book. We also have a free test on our website if you don't want to get the book. That's totally cool. It's so openness, conscientiousness is how organized
Don't
you
be
are.
cheap. Buy the book. It's a fantastic book. Jesus. Out of all the shitty books that have been out in the last year, this is definitely one of the best.
Okay. So conscientious is how organized
you're too nice. You're too nice.
I don't want to force it on people. Conscientious is how organized you are, how much like routine. Agreeableness is if you default to yes or no. Agreeableness is one of my favorite personality traits because it's overlooked. So agreeableness is like if I were to say, hey, UJ, where do you want to go for lunch? A high agreeable person will be like, wherever you want. A low agreeable person will be like, well, I looked on Yelp and I saw 5 reviews. It said that these places were good. They tend to default to no. It's very helpful when you're working on a team. Neuroticism is how someone approaches worry or how emotionally stable they are. And then extroversion is the easy one. Introversion or extroversion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, I've always, I don't want to say struggled with the notion of introversion and extroversion. But
Aren't you an ambivert, Jason?
I don't know.
I don't think you're an introvert. I think you're an introvert. I think
Really?
it fundamentally comes down to how you recharge. How do you recharge?
Yeah, I mean, let's explain it for you. This is obviously your wheelhouse. Because for me, it's like some people label themselves as like introverts or extroverts. And I've labeled myself as such and I don't even know what it means entirely. All I know is like there's times where I'm comfortable and times when I'm uncomfortable.
That's an ambivert.
And the times that I am uncomfortable, it's oftentimes because I can walk into a room of people for the first time, and if I didn't prep, I'll probably be nervous. if I prepped, I'll walk in there and I'll own the room, right? So, so to me, it's like introvert, extrovert is really more just you're comfortable in certain situations, you're uncomfortable in others, but you can prep and you can be comfortable in those other situations. So I don't know where I fall on the category, but
so we ran a big experiment on this because I found that most people were not comfortable with the category introvert or extrovert. So we decided to do a massive data collection on this, and we found that 82% of the people who we surveyed, and we had, I think, it was a sample size of 36,000.
Wow.
So really big
That's
sample
more
size.
than statistically.
Way
more.
huge.
Like
We like
12
big
times
data.
more
So
than-
you know, I'm a lab, so we want big data. It's the one thing that differentiates us from academic universities is big data.
Awesome.
So we found that about 81% of people were ambiverts, somewhere on that scale. So an ambivert is someone who, in specific situations, they thrive or survive. So in certain situations, they're like on it. They're their best selves. Like, for example, learning situations for me, intimate one-on-ones, great. Survive clubs, really loud restaurants where I can't hear people, really loud networking events. Those are like survive scenarios for me. So that's usually how you tell an extrovert will say, I don't have any survive places. An introvert will tell you, oh my God, everywhere is my survive place, except being alone or like, you know, by myself. So I would guess that you're an ambivert if there are certain times or places where you dial up or down.
Dan Martell would probably be extrovert plus
sure.
plus. He feels comfortable in pretty much any scenario.
Saul's also an extrovert.
Oh yeah, Saul's an extrovert for sure.
Saul's good. He's a good man. Cool. Anything you would add as far as things that you do during the event? I love that graph thing. I mean, that's like next level.
If you really want to dial up your relationships, if you're really looking to level up, that's
do you
it.
use? And I think it's such a dirty word, but do you use like a CRM?
I do not. I do not. I do old school, kind of a notebook of people. It's like my people Rolodex.
Got it.
Yeah, one of the things I actually really like to focus on during a conference is getting sleep.
Ah, yeah.
You're selfish. That's what you
What
are.
did I tell you? UJ and I went to dinner last night, and with Noah, and I was like, I have a date with my bathtub. Like, I got to go back to the hotel room.
You actually initiated that, which was cool.
I did. I was like, I got to go to my bathtub. I got a date there. Yeah.
They do have nice bathtubs
do.
here at the Four Seasons. I walked in, I was like, I don't take baths, but this may be a place where I take a bath.
I brought my own bath salts, friends.
Nice.
Like, that's how serious I am about baths.
So I do that, and also I like to figure out I like to think the schedule as like an optional thing. So very similar to what we were talking about. So everything on the schedule is optional, and it's up to the attendee to make your own adventure, create your own adventure. And I like to do my best to create my own adventure and try to think outside the realm of like what is actually happening and what other cool stuff can we do to help everybody else and just have a great time. So I like to do that. And so last year at 212, one of the mentors and I got along amazingly well. And I just essentially spent almost all of the mentor hours with him, just that one person, because I just realized like there was just so much engagement and learning in the room that I figured it would make sense to just do that. So a lot of the times at these events, sometimes people think there's a schedule, there's this, there's that. I need to sleep, and people are underrested. They're taking part in something they might not be engaged in because that's what they think they're supposed to do. We're here, like we're free agents. You can do whatever you want to do. So I think kind of taking agency and ownership of your own experience is hugely important. So I do my best to do that. And then I also kind of, at the end of the event, at the beginning of the event, I do like a impact filter, which is basically a fancy way of saying, like getting really clear on what's important, and what that means. And at the end, I'll review the filter and the people I want to connect with, and emails, phone calls, etc. And one of the things I like to do is like set up a call as soon as possible, right, as a closing loop. If it's someone I want to connect with, want to go deeper with, kind of thing. So
one more thing I forgot to mention logistically is I always book the day after the conference. I have at least 3 hours for follow-up.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Like I actually block it out as like conference follow-up, or else it just goes to the end. And by a week later, they're not going to remember you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Great point. Awesome. And the one thing I don't want to say I'll challenge on the whole notion of like the schedule is you kind of choose your own adventure.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Organize.
We're going to have to
Here we
retalk
go.
your admittance to MMT 2018, good sir, because, well, I mean, as a producer for me, the one thing, and this is a hang-up that I have, is just that in the sense that with Mastermind Talks, there's spots are so limited. If you come to the experience and you're not taking advantage of most of it, and you're opting out for most of it, there's an opportunity cost in the sense that like somebody else could have taken that spot and taken full advantage of it and played full out. So we'll talk later.
You're in trouble.
For what it's worth, I was at most events at Mastermind Talks this year.
Yeah.
Right? I was there for most of it.
Is that because you wanted to be, or because you felt like you were pushed? Like, did you feel pulled to go to most events, or did you feel pushed to go to most events?
A lot of the times I go and I just make a decision. So I'm one of those few people that don't feel awkward when I leave in a crowded room, because it's just the right decision to make. So you've seen me leave in situations.
But like as a speaker,
It's tough.
it's rough.
It's rough.
My
It's
friends.
rough.
Like I don't do it.
Yeah.
I try really hard not to do it,
Same.
just out of respect for
Same.
them.
And totally
As
understandable.
a speaker, you mean to stay?
Like because I've been a speaker so many times,
Yeah,
I
same.
try really hard to stay
Same.
and not like leave in the middle of a
Yeah.
you know.
And I've definitely learned empathy as I've spoken more.
Yeah.
So I like to.
Slowly. It's a very long process. But he's trying. I love you, Jay. He's trying.
So I like to come in at the back of the room if I'm unsure.
Yeah,
If I'm
yeah.
sure, like today, I was at the front of the room because you'll be more engaged when you're at the front. So
Yeah. Well, the one thing I don't want to say I would challenge, but the nice thing about looking at an itinerary and feeling like you're almost expected to be at those things is because sometimes it forces you to play full out, and some people won't. And I've been like that too. I'm like, I don't have to go to that, so I probably won't. I'm going to go back to my room, and I'm in my room on Facebook right now when there's like people I could be connecting with and things I could be doing and those kind of things. So that's the one thing is that I don't go to everything at an event, looking at it as a challenge, that I'm here to be here, be present, play full out. That's why I don't carry my phone or don't use my phone really during the event itself. It's just a different way of looking at it. But I know you have a different approach, and it works well for you.
I have two other little tips that I just thought of,
Sure.
actually, kind of on that note. So, you know how having a phone on the table sort of adds an element of like, at any moment that could go off.
Sure.
And if it goes off in front of everyone, they kind of see it. The opposite of that is when you're in a conversation at a conference. You know how you get interrupted a lot at conferences? Like you'll be there and they'll like ring the bell, or like a waitress comes over, or like someone clears your plate. Another offer or gift you can give someone else is two things. Is one saying, would you finish your story? It was really interesting. Like even asking someone to finish their
That's a
story.
great one.
Oh my, it's like the greatest offer. And then the other one is when someone joins you, and that happens all the time at a conference. Someone joins the breakfast table, or they join your group, or they sit at your table in the ballroom. And there's sort of this like, do we acknowledge them? We're kind of in conversation. Is always not only acknowledge them like, hey, like so glad you joined us. Hey, I was just talking to UJ about the levels of feedback. When you do that, it honors both UJ and the person seated, and you become an influencer just at your table. And when I was saying, like, don't talk to the speakers, the mentors, they get asked a lot, like doing that at your own table makes you an influencer right there and then. And it's a really nice offer of like conversation.
Yeah, no, that is a great tip. Like, I do that quite a bit. Again, one of those unconscious
But
things.
that happens natural to you. I had to learn that.
Yeah. Well, that's the beautiful thing about
Same.
you. Like, you have like a list of things like that you can't
Yes.
learn. Like this stuff I've learned over the years, kind of unconsciously. For me, it's one of those things. Like my North Star. There's several quotes, but like one of them is like business, like life, is all about how you make people feel. It's that simple and it's that hard. So it's like all my interactions, like the leaning forward. It's like if I was in their shoes right now, like how would I want that person to respond?
Yes.
So that's the only. So a lot of these things, that is my guiding, like my North Star. All these things kind of work into that on some level. So it's kind of unconscious, and that kind of plays into like the whole biggest fan philosophy that I always kind of share and talk about, that like marketers inherently are great at putting themselves in the shoes of their prospects and seeing their through their model of the world, like their wants, their needs, their fears, oftentimes better than they do. And I try to do that in the context of relationships and that kind of stuff. So Yeah. Well, thank
And
you
you're
for
also
that.
great at email. I think being great at email is hugely important.
I use a lot of happy faces.
Exclamation points, happy faces.
Well,
Do you use the carrot and the 3? That's my fave.
no. You sent me one. I forgot where my
I sent you one.
Yeah,
I did. Yeah. A little carrot, and the 3 is a heart, and
It's
it's
a heart,
great
yeah.
on text and email.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I just do a lot of happy faces. I'll email
Yeah, I'm smiley all the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if how that's received.
It's smiley and like the thumbs
And
up.
I actually smile when I do the happy face.
Yes.
I don't know if people do that as well. Like I'll end an email, I'll put a smile, and then I'll smile, and then I'll click send.
great.
And I wonder if like when people get it, if they think differently of it. But no, that's cool. Well, there's 2 things that I probably can contribute. One is the note thing. That is something I do quite a bit of. So getting back to the whole like curiosity thing, like finding out what's important to them and what lights them up. And I remember, I remember a guy I met at a conference in 2011 who his daughter, she was born blind and she was getting better. And I remember like that I didn't write down, but I remember that conversation vividly, and that became a talking point or a reason for me to reach out to him 6 months later and those kind of things. So I always try to like really capture those really kind of unique things about conversations, not necessarily how big their company is or any of that kind of stuff, but the name of their spouse or how many kids they have or, what's an area of focus for them. One question I ask all the time, which is, if we were to meet a year from today in Denver with a bottle of champagne, what are we celebrating? Like, what achievement are we celebrating? Is it something personal, professional?
Yeah.
And then you figure that out, and then that also gives you a reason to reach back out or have that on your radar in the future. Because that's the one thing too that I think a lot of people like follow up, and we'll talk about that in a second. Is super super crucial, and that's why I love that you actually schedule it out at the end of the event. Because like you said, once you get back home and like. Life happens, and then there's 3 weeks later, and you're like, damn, I really want to follow up, but now it's been 3 weeks.
Exactly. There's so specifically, whenever I hear like, oh, like find something that lights them up, that would have been advice someone would have given me, and I would have been like, what? So here's a really, if you hear that and you're like, I don't know what they're talking about or how to do that, here's what I think of. So if you can, I think everyone has a pet project or a pest project. Very easy way to remember it. So a pet is just like a pet at home. Like when you're out and your dog is at home, you're like, oh, I hope my dog is okay. You like want to get home and like snuggle the pet and like hang out with your pet. And it's like you really love it. Everyone has one of those emotionally. So what is the thing that someone is stroking or petting like in their head? Like what's the pet project or the pet topic that they like? It's always in the back of their head to get back to it. So what can you ask to find out what their pet project is? It could even be, what's
that
your pet
question,
project?
yeah.
Yes, it could be that. I try to like take a little bit more of a circuitous route. Like for example, last night at dinner, after many, many questions, I found out that the lady next to me, her pet project was painting dolls, like dolls' faces, which was a very specific pet project, but she lit up the moment we started talking about it.
I remember that.
Yeah, she like totally lit up. And then the other one, which is interesting, only if you're brave enough, is the pest. So a pest is like, think about your home. If you have a pest in your home, it's a real nuisance. It worries you. You don't sleep at night from it. You like, oh, you don't want to deal with it. You're hoping it just goes away on its own. It's this thing that just like gets tugging at you. And if you can make someone feel like, A, they're not the only one who has that pest problem. Maybe you even have some solutions to get rid of it naturally. You become this ally. So if you're brave enough, you could also ask, what is the thing that's dragging on them? What's the pest that they're ashamed of or embarrassed about or they're worried about that are keeping them up at night? And can you make them feel less alone or can you help them with it? Those are 2 ways you can find what lights someone up very specifically.
Yeah, so it's actually I like the way you kind of frame that for sure. And there's so the 2 questions I use, and they somewhat touch on both. Yeah. So one is that champagne moment. If we were to meet a year from today, what are we celebrating? And the second thing is, and I usually use it in the context of business, and people seem to enjoy the question, which is, in order for your business to jump to the next level, what is something that you need to solve or overcome? So when you ask like, when you ask like, what's that champagne moment a year from now, and they tell you what it is, and they're all excited, then I usually ask in order to achieve that, is something you need to solve or overcome.
That's the
and
pest.
then I try to be like that connector and solve that problem.
That's the pest, for sure.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Okay, so we just took those things and made them even more tactical.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now you have 2 questions.
That's fantastic. Great. Cool. And then the other thing that obviously I do is host dinners. That is something I do a lot of at the end of this event. So, and I think this is more of a typical event as far as how they do it. Because at my mastermind talks, we do everything together the entire duration. But the first night there was this mixer, so there was an opportunity to host a dinner that first evening, and then tonight there's a group dinner. Tomorrow's the final day of the event, and it ends at 5. So tomorrow I'm hosting a dinner, and I think we'll have probably close to 30 people.
Oh, wow. So half of the 212, basically.
Yeah, well, that and just a lot of local fascinating entrepreneurs. I mean, as you know, I hold these dinners, especially as of late, almost once a week.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's another kind of great tool. Well, listen, I appreciate it. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
This is actually
Forever.
I didn't know the direction of how this would go. But this was so tactical, so valuable. I'm certain it was valuable to me, somebody who prides themselves on being like a great relationship person, especially in the context of live experiences and that kind of stuff. So I'm sure for people listening, they'll be jazzed. So thank you so much, UJ.
Boom.
High five.
Always a pleasure.
Vanessa, darling, thank you so much. And I guess we're off to dinner soon. 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
7 o'clock.
Let's do this.
Woo-hoo, let's do it.
So that's it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for investing the time to listen. As mentioned earlier in the show, we'll be giving away 10 copies of Vanessa's book, Captivate, in the Community Made group, a book that we referenced several times in this episode. If you're not a member, joining the group is free. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. And as a second quick side note, as I made mention earlier in the episode as well, for fun, I decided to take some of the concepts from this season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify business relationships and deep dive a little bit in a live workshop setting. To my surprise, the first workshop sold out very, very quickly, so we decided to schedule a second one. For dates and availability on that, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. That's superconnectorworkshop.com. If you enjoyed this episode, show some love to UJ and Vanessa by taking a screenshot of your podcast app and pinging them on Twitter or Instagram at UJ Ramdas. That's UJ RAMDAS and VVANEDWARDS. That's V Van Edwards. For more details on both of them, visit ujramdas.com, or for Vanessa, scienceofpeople.com. Before I go, I got to give a good shout out to my buddy Jay Wong for leaving the following review on iTunes. He said, "As a podcaster that takes a lot of pride in my own artistry, Jason, and this podcast is where I draw inspiration for not only just my show, but for my business and life as well. Thank you for constantly pushing the envelope and making a difference in people's lives. It sure has in mine." Jay, my man, thank you very much for the rating and review. For the rest of you out there, if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and like what we're doing here at Community Made, I would be forever grateful if you would share this podcast with a friend or leave us an honest review on either iTunes or Facebook, just like Jay did. Join me on the next episode of Community Made, where I share how to reach the unreachable. I guess you could say strategies and philosophies that will enable you to befriend celebrities and billionaires. I'll see you in the next episode. Enjoy your week.